Welcome to my channel. Sit back and listen to the best true crime stories. Let's go.
Hardly any other crime has ever stirred the German public so much. It has caused such a stir in the media and led to polarized conclusions. When discussing it, all participants in the debate were bound to argue and quarrel. Some shouted that it was all mixed up, that the criminal should not be punished and the victim should be there and then, that the laws in this case should be ignored, and most importantly, they said, if I were the killer, I'd do the same thing. Others tried to reason with them, explain that vigilante justice is a road to chaos, a return to the Dark Ages, that the framework of modern society is laws and their strict observance. Without it, the edifice of human civilization will crumble, burying under it all notions of honesty and justice. But these arguments, like the tide of the sea, dissipated overnight with the receipt of full information. Revenge on March 6, 1981, 30. Year. Old Marianne Bachmeier entered the deliberation room of the District Court of Lübeck, Federal Republic of Germany, where the murder trial of her 7-year-old daughter Anna was in its third day. She took a small Beretta M 1934 pistol out of the pocket of her beige coat and shot the defendant 7 times in the back. 6 of the bullets hit the target. Everyone present froze for a few seconds and lost the power of speech. And the woman with her head proudly raised left the room, threw the gun on the floor, and without resistance allowed herself to be arrested. A few months earlier, the man she killed, 34-year-old Klaus Grabowski, had confessed that on May 5, 1980, he had held little Anna in his home for several hours. He raped her, strangled her with pantyhose, and then placed her in a cardboard box, which he threw away on the bank of the city canal. It wasn't his first child abuse, but it was his first murder. I didn't want to go to jail, so I decided to dispose of the girl's body. Marianne Bachmeier later described her feelings at the time of Klaus' murder this way. I saw his back, and for some reason I imagined so clearly how he was leaning over my baby girl, how he was raping her and then strangling her. There was no doubt about it. He just had to die. Many Germans felt the same way. They were completely on Marianne's side. They empathized with her. They cursed the rapist, murderer, and the system that failed to stop the bastard in time. Law enforcement had known about Klaus Grabowski's proclivities since 1973. That's when he first tried to kidnap a child. He attacked a 6-year-old girl and started dragging her into his car. She twisted and ran away. Grabowski caught up with her and started choking her, but the girl screamed and kicked so violently that Klaus let her go. He received only a year's probation for the crime. 2 years later, Klaus committed another offense, and it, alas, ended in the rape of 2 9-year-olds. Grabowski very much did not want to go to prison, well imagining what the prisoners would do to him there. In those years, voluntary chemical castration of child molesters in exchange for a reduced sentence was actively practiced in Germany. Klaus agreed to undergo it and serve time in a psychiatric hospital. The castration took place in 1976, and in 1978, Grabowski began to live with a girl, thanks to which he managed to convince the Supervisory Commission and the doctor that he was cured of pedophilia. The endocrinologist, going along with the patient who wanted to make love like all normal people, prescribed hormone therapy to reverse the effects of chemical castration. Less than 3 years after it began, on May 5, 1980, Klaus Grabowski kidnapped 7-year-old Anna Bachmeier. He was arrested the very next night on a tip from the girl he was living with. Grabowski confessed to the murder, but denied having non-consensual sex with the victim and abusing her. Instead, he told the story that he strangled the girl after she tried to blackmail him. saying Anna was still the seductress who had been signaling her desire for sex for a long time, and then she threatened to tell her mother about it if Grabowski didn't pay for her silence. Naturally, no one believed this nonsense, but at the trial, defense attorneys tried to play this statement Grabowski, calling them the delusions of an unhappy man who has suffered for many years from hormonal imbalance caused by chemical castration and the process of reversing it, tried to shift responsibility for Anna's death to the errors and omissions of the system on the doctors who know so little about the effects of chemical castration but actively use it. The system has failed us. The people of Germany thought as they listened to this, held a molester in its hands, but for some reason it let him go free, as if given carte blanche to torture and kill our children, left us no choice but to break the law ourselves. It was the system that put the weapon in Marianne's hands. Bachmeier's act seemed to quench the public's thirst for vengeance, loud and shrill when it comes to child sexual abuse. Yes, it was a lynching, but what was the inconsolable mother supposed to do? Hope for a just verdict from the German themies. She didn't wait, she didn't trust the system, and without a sound she carried out the death penalty on her daughter's murderer. Yes, it was scary and shocking, but who among normal parents, if they were in her shoes, wouldn't want to do the same? Many people called Marianne Bachmeier's act moral and courageous. They saw it primarily as an act of desperation by a grieving mother. Pedophiles are imprisoned and then released after a while and even no longer under control. We live with them again on the same streets. We fear for our own children. Humanity is not for pedophiles. They deserve a horrible death. Bachmeier did the right thing. These days, Marianne has become a national hero for some Germans, but for others, a terrible advertisement for lynching. Tall, beautiful, dark-skinned, with a magnificent figure, she looked perfect in photos and videos. It was hard not to admire her because she embodied all the signs of a modern woman's strength, self-sufficiency, intelligence, boldness, and fearlessness. The press called her avenging mother. Thousands of citizens wrote letters and sent bouquets. In 1 week, she collected 100 zero marks to pay for her lawyer and other defense costs. Film companies offered to make a TV series and 2 movies. Soon there was not a single person left in Germany who did not know this woman's story. Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies were preparing to charge her with first-degree premeditated murder, which carries a life sentence in Germany. It turned out that Bachmeier did not seem to have committed her punishment spontaneously in a state of passion. She planned the murder, having bought a .22 caliber pistol in advance, and even practiced using it for several days. And after firing the shots in court, she told the police officers who detained her, "I wanted to kill him, shoot that pig in the face, but unfortunately, I had to shoot him in the back. I hope he's dead." The public protested against the charges brought against Marianne by the prosecutor's office. They believed that it was the system that was responsible for the death of the pedophile, and that the doctors responsible for restoring Klaus Grabowski's libido should be tried. The prosecutor and the judge even received several anonymous threats. If they convicted Marianne, they would pay for it. Meanwhile, Bachmeier and Christian Berthold, the biological father of the murdered Anna, petitioned the prosecutor's office in Lübeck and the Attorney General of the Schleswig states to initiate proceedings against Grabowski's doctors. But their petitions were rejected as unfounded. They tried to do the same in the High Court of Justice, but failed there as well. The system continued to protect itself, while the real victim, an inconsolable single mother who had lost her child, was going to be locked up for the rest of her life. Marianne needed money for her defense. She owned a tiny pub where she worked as a bartender and waiter. She was barely making ends meet and couldn't afford lawyers. So when she was approached by Stern magazine with an offer to sell the story, Marianne agreed. Rumor has it that she was paid the equivalent of $158,000 for the series of articles, a very impressive sum for Germany in those years. And that's when previously unknown information about Marianne began to surface that many people not only didn't expect to hear, but didn't want to know. Under the inquisitive gaze of the media, the ideal image of Marianne Bachmeier began to crumble. It turned out that the life of the avenging mother was actually the embodiment of sexual recklessness, frivolity, and selfishness. And it may be that Anna's gruesome death was a foregone conclusion. An uncomplicated reality, Marianne Bachmeier was born on June 3, 1950, in the small West German town of Sarstedt in Lower Saxony, where her parents had moved from East Prussia after the end of World War II. Bachmeier's family was religious and conservative. Her mother was a housewife. Her father served in the Waffen-SS during the war and was even awarded the Iron Cross. After the war, he opened a tiny beer house and began to drink, quickly becoming an aggressive alcoholic. In his drunken rage, he talked only about the war, remembering his former merits and heroics. Now he was a defeated loser, fleeing from reality in the alcoholic haze of pubs. Marianne's mother did not put up with it too long, left her husband, and soon found a new one, however, not much different from the previous one, except that he didn't drink, but he was also a vicious despot who tried to train his stepdaughter. It is said that Marianne grew up a problem child, but whether she was such from birth or it was the result of oppressive home environment, it is not known. The girl's relationship with her stepfather did not work out. He believed that she lacked discipline, that Marianne was promiscuous and careless. Her mother sided with her husband. As a result, at the age of 15, she threw her daughter out of the house. The girl immediately joined the company of hippies and began actively smoking marijuana. In 1966, at the age of 16, she gave birth to a baby of unknown parentage. She took him to the hospital and gave him up for adoption. 2 years later, she got knocked up again by someone, and with the child, she did the same thing she refused. She did not work anywhere, often slept in lodgings, and according to her personal confession, she was not choosy about sexual relations. Naturally, leading such a lifestyle, she was raped several times by drunken drinking buddies. When she was 22 years old, Marianne's father died, and she got his tiny pub called Tapasa. To manage the business, she hired an assistant, Christian Berthold, just like herself, a lax young man who likes to smoke pot and do nothing. Soon they had a romance, and November 14, 1972, Marianne gave birth to his third child, Anna. Christian's daughter was completely unnecessary about what he immediately put in the mistress. He continued to work in the pub, but the child treated as something alien and intrusive. Marianne also had neither time nor desire to take care of little Anna. From infancy, the little girl practically lived with her mother in a beer hall. She slept under the thundering music and shouts of the drunken public, grew up there, played, absorbed the surrounding moors. And Marianne did not have to rush home to the child because the child was always at her side. They often quarreled and fought with Christian, threw beer mugs and plates at each other. They didn't clean the apartment for months, so it was completely unsanitary. Smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol, all in the presence of a child. The Tapasa pub opened at lunchtime and was open half the night, so during the day Marianne slept in. All this time little Anna was left to herself, eating whatever she could, playing with herself, not learning anything. When she grew up, she was always late for school and did not do her homework. Friends and acquaintances said that Marianne treated her daughter as an adult, expecting her to take care of herself somehow. But in principle, she realized that she did not need the child and that she was growing up in an inappropriate environment. Therefore, when Anna turned 6, she started to think about giving her up for adoption. The day the pedophile raped and strangled Anna, the girl was again left to her own devices. Marianne got angry at the little girl for some small thing, yelled at her, and kicked her out the door to go to school by herself. Anna needed a loving home and a single person who cared about her. A kind uncle lived next door. He always greeted Anna, smiled, gave her candy, and let her pet his fluffy red cat. It was to him that Anna went that day. That neighbor was Klaus Grabowski. Anna was already dead, and neither Marianne nor Christian Berthold even knew that the child had disappeared. It was only late at night that they realized it and called the police. Court, after learning all this information, the German public and the court had second thoughts. It was not what it looked like at first. The story of a strong woman's just retribution had turned into a nauseating tale of a cuckoo mother. Now it was necessary to decide who Marianne was, really an inconsolable mother who avenged the pedophile for the death of her child, or a simple whore whose life led to the murder of the little girl. And then there was the question of Marianne's motives. Why was she not interested in the child before, and now she decided to avenge it so zealously? Was Grabowski's murder, in the end, a reaction to the emotional turmoil of bereavement, or the simple aggression to which this woman was prone? Now many people looked at Bachmeier and her deed differently. They sympathized with little Anna from the bottom of their hearts, cursed Klaus Grabowski, and condemned Marianne and called her the cause of the crime. There were even statements that this woman enjoyed the attention of the press to herself. She reveled in her popularity and posed for the cameras. The trial of Marianne Bachmeier lasted several months. At the hearing, she explained that she shot Grabowski as if in a dream. She saw her late daughter in the courtroom pointing her finger at her killer. Defense attorneys built their tactic on claims that Bachmeier had a horrific childhood that led to her mental instability. She didn't buy the gun to kill Grabowski, but to commit suicide. Most importantly, Marianne was diagnosed with depression, exacerbated by her time in prison. The District Court of Lübeck took these arguments into account, and in March 1983 concluded that Marianne Bachmeier had acted in a state of passion under exceptional circumstances. He called her crime manslaughter and sentenced her to 6 years in prison. The well-known German Institute for Public Opinion Research, Allensbach Institute, conducted a study to try to understand how the German society evaluated this court verdict. It turned out that 28% considered Bachmeier's 6-year sentence to be adequate, another 27% excessively harsh, and 25% too small for what she had done. In other words, the majority thought Marianne was guilty and did not support her lynching. Bachmeier spent only 3 years in prison, including the time of investigation and trial, being released early in June 1985. At the end of that year, she married an unnamed schoolteacher and moved with him to Lagos, Nigeria, in 1988. Their marriage ended in divorce in 1990. Shortly afterward, Marianne went to Sicily, where she began writing a book about her life, worked at a hospice in Palermo as a euthanasia assistant, and actively gave interviews to the local press. In one of them, she revealed that she left Lübeck because she associated the city with grief. For me, this city became a killer city. Lübeck is a beautiful place, but it reminded me too much of my daughter's death and the trial. And when asked if she felt remorse for the murder, she said she never felt any regret. In 1995, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Bachmeier returned to Germany and contacted NDR Norddeutscher Rundfunk television and radio reporter Lucas Mario Burmer. She wanted to capture her last days of life on videotape. It seems that even at death's doorstep, this woman fiercely desired public attention and sympathy for her fate. Years later, it is safe to say that, contrary to the verdict of the court, Marianne Bachmeier did in fact plan the murder of Klaus Grabowski. In 1995, she voiced her motives on the ARD talk show Fleege. "I wanted to punish him and prevent him from spreading lies about my daughter." On September 17, 1996, she died at the age of 46 and was buried next to her daughter Anna in the Bergter Cemetery in Lübeck. The story of Marianne Bachmeier is not unique. Something very similar happened in April 1993 in the States. On April 2, also in the courtroom 41-year-old Ellie Nessler shot serial rapist Daniel Mark Driver 5 times in the head. One of the pedophile's victims was Ellie's 6-year-old son. At first, as in the case of Marianne Bachmeier, Americans zealously supported the unfortunate mother. But then it turned out that she was an accomplished drug addict who treated her maternal duties accordingly. At the time of the rapist's murder, the woman was under the influence of methamphetamine. In 2002, she went to prison for selling the drug. And in 2008, she died of breast cancer. Epilogue. Since the epilogue is the final part of the work, not necessarily connected with it by an inseparable development of the action, I will allow myself a little liberty here. Namely, I will have the nerve to state the moral of this story. I will tell whether chemical castration is an effective method against child molesters. About the moral of the story. All the time I see various media, bloggers, celebrities, and ordinary people telling the story of Marianne Bachmeier, manipulating information about the case. Not a word is said about her life and how little Anna grew up, but they write with awe-inspiring breath about the murder of a pedophile in court. Naturally, anyone who so hears this story, there is an incredibly bright emotional impulse. Well done, woman, she did the right thing. There are always hundreds of similar comments under articles of this type. As a mom of 3 children and grandmother of 4, I can say with certainty that I would want to do the same as Marianne. We would all do the same. This is a real mother who went through so much pain and suffering. People all over the world should know her story. I think the main moral of the fable about Marianne Bachmeier is to never jump to emotional conclusions until you know the full picture. Only the totality of all details forms the truth. Without them, the information voiced is not just a distortion of reality, but a complete lie. On the effectiveness of chemical castration. Chemical castration is castration performed with the help of hormones or so-called anti-androgenic drugs. It leads to a decrease in libido and sexual activity. Unlike surgical castration, in which an orchectomy removal of the testicles is performed, it is not a form of sterilization. It is usually reversible. It is used in some countries of the world in exchange for a reduced sentence. That is, the consent of the convicted person is required, and in some countries as a coercive measure, punishment of criminals. To date, most medical professionals consider chemical castration to be an ineffective way of dealing with sex offenders. A few examples. Indonesia in 2017, the country authorized chemical castration for offenders who committed sex crimes against minors. Then, President Joko Widodo proposed the measure in May after the country was rocked by the gang rape of a 14-year-old girl. Sexual violence against children has increased significantly in Indonesia, the president said at the time. The new decree will give judges the ability to choose harsher punishments that will have a deterrent effect on offenders. He said, "Did it work? In Indonesia, cases of sexual abuse of minors have continued and even increased since the chemical castration law was passed." According to the Indonesian Witness and Victim Protection Agency LPSK, 70 cases of child sexual abuse were reported in 2017, doubled to 149 in 2018, and nearly doubled again to 258 in 2019. U.S. sexologist John Money was the first American to use chemical castration in 1966. He prescribed medroxyprogesterone acetate to treat patients with pedophilic impulses. 30 years later, in 1996, The state of California amended its penal code to include chemical castration in the list of possible measures for those convicted of sexually abusing minors. A year later, Florida passed a similar law. Currently, 9 states have a similar penalty. Did it work? At first it seemed to. From 1993 to 2006, states that implemented chemical castration saw a dramatic drop in child sex crimes, 47% fewer. Since 2010, however, the numbers have been plummeting. For example, in 2016, 329 children were victims of sexual abuse in the states. In 67% of cases, the abusers turned out to be members of the child's family. Poland was the first European country to apply forced chemical castration to child molesters. It happened in 2010. However, things did not go very smoothly, because in Poland about 30% of child abuse cases are committed by members of the Catholic Church. Did it work? As in the States, there was a decline at first. For example, while in 2017 there were 184 cases of child molestation in Poland, in 2018 there were 775, and already in 2019 there were 709. However, in 2020 there was a sharp increase again, which broke even the record of 2017 to 517 cases. South Korea forced chemical castration in this country became effective in 2013. It is applied to pedophiles over the age of 19, who, according to the court, are prone to recidivism. Has it worked? No. In 2020, there were 1.5 times as many cases of child sexual abuse as in 2016, 42. 251 cases vs. 674.